The night skies over Ariax's planet were filled with a mesmerizing dance of stars. The planet's surface, covered in vast green plains and towering mountains, seemed peaceful, but in the heart of the royal palace, chaos was brewing. Queen Ariax, the ruler of a powerful alien race, stood alone in her chambers, her expression a mix of worry and exhaustion. Time was running out, and she knew it. Her species had a strange and ancient connection to their mates. Without one, they would wither and die. It wasn't just a matter of love or emotion, it was a biological necessity. The queen had ruled her people for many years, leading them through countless battles, but now, the weight of her duty had grown heavier than ever. The palace was in turmoil. Her advisors whispered in dark corners, and the warriors of her empire, strong and capable, searched tirelessly for a solution. But no one could provide what Ariax needed. No one could fulfill the role of a mate, and without one, her people would face extinction. The thought made her shiver, but she could not let it show. As the leader of the empire, her strength had always been her greatest weapon. But now, her strength seemed meaningless against the clock ticking in her mind. Her people's survival depended on her. But how could she choose a mate when none of her own species could connect with her on a deeper level? Their kind had grown distant, their connections weakening over the centuries. Her search for a match had come up empty. There were no more leaders among her own race who could provide the connection she needed. As much as it hurt her pride, the only option left was to turn to a human. Humans were seen as weak by many of the galaxy's more advanced species, but Ariax knew that the humans possessed something that her people had lost, a deep, emotional connection that could be the key to the survival of her species. It was a strange idea, but it was the only idea she had left. The decision to turn to the humans wasn't easy. They were outsiders, and their ways were foreign to her. But in this moment of desperation, she had no choice. She sent for the human diplomat, Ethan, who had been working with her empire for the past few years. He was a man of many talents, but his most remarkable skill was his ability to understand the emotions and complexities of other species. When Ethan arrived at the palace, he was escorted to Ariax's chambers, his face set in a neutral expression. He had been briefed on the situation, but the urgency in the queen's voice still caught him off guard. "I am told you seek my help," Ethan said as he stood before the queen, his voice steady but cautious. Ariax looked at him, her gaze piercing and calm. "I do not seek your help, diplomat," she replied, her tone betraying the exhaustion she felt. "I need you. My people need you. Without your assistance, we will be lost." Ethan didn't know what to say. He had been working with Ariax for a long time, and he knew she was strong, intelligent, and capable. But now she sounded desperate. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "I need you to help me find a way to connect with my mate," Ariax said, her voice softer now, as if the weight of the words had finally sunk in. "The mate who can save my people." Ethan's brow furrowed. He had heard of the alien species' mating rituals, but he had never been fully briefed on the details. "You need a mate?" he asked, trying to understand the gravity of the situation. "Yes," Ariax answered. "Without a mate, my life force will fade. The same will happen to my people. Our race is bound to the energy of our mate. If I do not find one soon, it will be the end." Ethan's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the situation. The idea of an entire species facing extinction because their leader could not find a mate seemed almost impossible. And yet here she was, standing before him, asking for his help. "But why me? Why not someone from your own people?" he asked, unable to hide his confusion. Ariax's eyes softened for a moment. "There are no longer any among my people who can fulfill the role. The bond between us has weakened over time. We have forgotten how to truly connect. But humans, you have something we no longer possess. You can form a bond that goes deeper than just survival. It's that bond that I need." Ethan stared at the queen, his mind trying to make sense of the idea. He had seen the deep connections between people in his own life, but the thought of an entire species relying on such a bond was overwhelming. And yet, despite his reservations, he knew that there was no other choice. "All right," Ethan said, his voice firm now. "I will help you. I will try to understand your ways, and I will help you find the mate you need." Ariax's expression softened, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "You do not understand what this means, human," she said, her voice almost trembling. "But I am grateful." Ethan nodded. "We'll figure it out together." As the days passed, Ethan found himself becoming more involved in Ariax's world. He learned about the alien rituals, the ancient traditions that had once bound her people together. The more he learned, the more he realized just how complex and fragile her species' connection to each other had become. Ariax took Ethan to the royal gardens, where she showed him the ancient trees that her people once relied on for guidance. The trees, massive and wise, were a symbol of the deep bond between the queen and her people. But now they stood silent and still, unable to provide the strength they once had. "This is what we have become," Ariax said quietly, her eyes looking at the trees with a sense of sorrow. "Once we were strong, we were united, but now we are on the brink of destruction. Without the mate, there is no future for us." Ethan looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He could feel the desperation in her voice, and he could sense the fear behind her calm exterior. He wanted to help more than anything, but the task before them seemed impossible. But he knew that he could not turn away now. Not when the fate of an entire species rested in his hands. Ariax looked at him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Do you understand now?" she asked softly. "I think so," Ethan replied. "But this isn't going to be easy, is it?" "No," Ariax answered. "It will not be easy, but it is the only chance we have." The two of them stood in the garden, the weight of the moment settling over them. Ethan had come to help, but now he realized that he was part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. He had stepped into a world where survival depended not only on strength, but on connection, on the ability to form bonds that transcended species and culture. And as he looked at the alien queen, he wondered what his role would truly be in this strange new world. And so, their journey began. The future of Ariax's people hung in the balance, and Ethan knew that whatever came next, it would change both of their lives forever. Ethan's mind was racing as he sat in the royal gardens, absorbing the weight of what had just been revealed to him. The alien queen, Ariax, had made it clear that her people were in grave danger. If she didn't find a mate soon, her species would die. It wasn't just a matter of finding love or companionship, but something much deeper, something that tied their very existence to their mates. As the diplomat for Earth, Ethan had worked with many species before, but he had never faced a situation like this. He could sense the deep despair in Ariax's eyes, and that fear gnawed at him. Ariax stood next to him, her posture regal, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Despite the beauty of the gardens surrounding them, a heavy sadness lingered. In the air, Ethan knew that for all her strength, the queen was on the brink of giving up. She had tried everything, yet here she was depending on a human to save her people. The responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders, but he knew there was no turning back. "I'm still not sure what I'm supposed to do," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. "I don't understand your people's ways, Ariax, but I'm willing to help as much as I can." Ariax turned to face him, her alien features softening. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, something Ethan hadn't expected to see. "I don't know if you can help, human. My species has grown weak over the centuries. We have lost the ability to connect with one another on a deeper level. The bond that once existed between mates is now almost gone. But there's something different about you, something I cannot explain. I feel drawn to you, Ethan." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Her words, though simple, were charged with a weight he couldn't ignore. He had felt it too, the strange pull, the connection that seemed to grow between them each time they spoke. But he had dismissed it as the result of the pressure they were both under. It wasn't something he could entertain, not when the fate of an entire species rested on his shoulders. And yet, as he looked at her, He couldn't deny the tension that seemed to spark whenever they were near each other. "I don't know what to say," Ethan admitted, looking down at his hands. He had always been good with words, but now he was struggling to find the right ones. "I'm not your people. I don't know how to form the kind of bond you need. But if there's anything I can do, just being here helps," Ariax interrupted softly. "Just your presence gives me hope. I can't explain it. But there's something in the way you listen, in the way you understand without words. My people, we've lost that. We've forgotten what it's like to truly be in tune with one another." Ethan stood up, pacing back and forth as he tried to make sense of it all. The weight of the situation was starting to sink in. There were no easy answers, no quick solutions, and yet, there was something about Ariax that made him want to try. He wanted to help her even though he knew the risks involved. He could feel the pressure building, the responsibility heavy in his chest. "All right," he said, stopping in front of her. "I'll help you. I'll learn your ways and I'll try to understand. But we need to be realistic. This isn't going to be easy, and I can't promise anything. You're asking me to connect with you in a way I don't fully understand." Ariax nodded slowly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I know it won't be easy, but even the smallest spark of hope can lead to something greater. I just need you to try." The two of them stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling over them. Ethan wasn't sure what came next, but he knew he had to take the first step. He had to try. Days passed, and Ethan found himself growing more involved in Ariax's world. She introduced him to the ancient rituals that her people had followed for centuries, hoping to rekindle the lost connection between them. He learned that her species' bond with their mate was not just a physical one, it was spiritual too. They could sense each other's emotions, thoughts, and even their memories. The bond was a deep, intimate connection, one that transcended the physical world. As Ethan spent more time with Ariax, he began to understand the gravity of what she was asking. This wasn't just a matter of finding someone to fill a role, it was about saving a species from extinction. The Queen's people relied on this connection to survive. Without it, they would wither away, their once great empire fading into history. But despite his growing understanding, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The rituals, the teachings, they were all fascinating, but they didn't feel real to him. He had spent his life dealing with politics, with negotiating treaties, with solving problems in the most rational way possible. This was something different. There was no logical explanation for it. No concrete solution. One evening, after a long day of training, Ethan found himself alone in the garden, staring up at the stars. The beauty of the night sky, so different from Earth's, filled him with a sense of awe. He had never been to a place like this before, an alien world, where everything was foreign and yet strangely familiar. As he looked up at the stars, his thoughts drifted to his home on Earth. What would his people think if they knew what was happening here? If they knew he was helping an alien queen, trying to form a connection that could save her species? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind him. "You're thinking too much," Ariax said, her voice gentle. "Sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot understand." Ethan turned to see her standing in the doorway, her figure illuminated by the soft light of the moon. She looked different somehow. There was a calmness about her, a serenity that he hadn't seen before. She wasn't just the powerful queen of a dying species anymore. She was a woman, vulnerable, and searching for something she had lost. "I don't know what to do, Ariax," Ethan admitted, his voice low. "I don't understand any of this. I've never been part of something like this before." Ariax stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light but firm. "You're doing more than you know. Just by being here, just by trying, you are helping me. You are helping my people." Ethan met her gaze, his heart racing in his chest. He had never felt this kind of connection before, not with anyone. He didn't know how to explain it, but it was there. It was real. "I don't know how to be the mate you need," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll try. I'll do whatever it takes." Ariax's eyes softened, and for the first time she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. "That's all I ask, Ethan. All I need is for you to try." In that moment, something shifted between them. There was an unspoken understanding, a promise of something deeper. Ethan wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that this journey was far from over. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with Ariax by his side. Together, they would find a way to save her people. Together, they would discover what it meant to truly connect. The stars above them twinkled, as if watching over them, as if giving their silent blessing to the bond that was slowly beginning to form. Ethan had never been one to back down from a challenge, but the more time he spent on Ariax's world, the more he realized how deeply complicated this situation was. It wasn't just about learning alien rituals or understanding customs. He was now intertwined with the fate of an entire species. The Queen's people, once powerful and united, were slowly withering away, and their survival rested on a connection that, to Ethan, seemed impossible to achieve. But what made it even more difficult was the strange, growing bond between him and Ariax. The more they spoke, the more they shared, the more Ethan felt something stir inside him, a pull that he couldn't explain. There was something about her presence, something so different from what he had known in his own world. She was a ruler, yes, but she was also just a woman, struggling with the same fears and uncertainties as anyone else. As the days passed, the bond between them seemed to deepen. It was subtle at first, small gestures, moments of shared understanding. The way she would look at him when he least expected it, her quiet words of encouragement when he doubted himself. She was not like the powerful queen he had imagined when he first arrived. Beneath that strength, there was a vulnerability he hadn't anticipated, one that made her all the more real to him. Ethan found himself thinking about her even when she wasn't around. He thought about the way her eyes softened when she spoke, of her people, the sadness in her voice when she mentioned the decline of her species. She wasn't just asking for his help, she was asking for something far deeper. She was asking for trust, for hope. It was a difficult thing to give, but something in him wanted to try. He didn't know if he could fulfill the role she needed, but every time she looked at him with that quiet intensity, he felt an undeniable urge to step up. One evening, after a long day of studying the ancient rituals and discussing her people's history, Ariax invited Ethan to join her in the royal hall. The chamber was large, with high arched ceilings and walls covered in intricate carvings, depicting the long and proud history of her people. The soft glow of the chandeliers illuminated the space, casting long shadows on the stone floor. Ariax stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the light of the setting sun. She was gazing out at the vast landscape, her face unreadable. Ethan stepped into the room, his footsteps quiet on the stone floor. He could sense the tension in the air, the weight of the moment. "You've been distant lately," she said, her voice soft but laced with concern. "What's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, he wasn't sure what to think anymore. The situation had grown more complex with each passing day. But more than that, he couldn't ignore the growing connection between him and Ariax. It was something he hadn't expected, and it both scared and intrigued him. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice steady but thoughtful, "about what you said before, about how my presence is helping you. I don't know how, but I feel like I'm becoming part of something much bigger than myself, and it's overwhelming." Ariax turned to face him, her expression softening. She walked over to him, her steps measured but graceful. "I understand," she said, her voice quiet. "This is not an easy journey. It's not just about rituals and ceremonies. It's about trust. It's about a connection that goes beyond anything you've experienced before. And I know it's difficult for you." Ethan looked at her, his gaze searching. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, for whatever this is between us. I've never felt this way about anyone before. I don't know if I'm strong enough to be what you need." Ariax stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. There was a quiet intensity in her gaze, something that reached deep into him. "You're stronger than you think," she said, her voice low but full of conviction. "Strength isn't just about physical power. It's about the ability to open your heart, to trust when everything around you seems uncertain." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something in her words that resonated with him, something that stirred emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He had always been focused on logic, on reason, on what made sense. But this didn't make sense. And yet, it felt real. It felt important. "I want to help you, Ariax," he said, his voice firming with resolve. "I do. But I don't know if I'm capable of giving you what you need. I don't know if I can be what you're asking for." Ariax reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but steady. "You're already giving me something," she said softly. "Just by being here, by trying. That's all I need. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be perfect. All I ask is that you try. That's what will save my people. That's what will save us." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of her words hanging between them. Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and clarity. He didn't know if he could live up to the Queen's expectations. He didn't know if he could form the kind of bond she needed. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away. Not now. "I'll try," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll try, Ariax. I don't know how, but I will." A flicker of hope crossed her face, and she gave him a small, grateful smile. "That's all I ask." As the days passed, Ethan and Ariax grew closer. They spent more time together, working side by side to understand the intricacies of the rituals and the deep emotional bond required for their species' survival. It wasn't easy. The connection they were attempting to forge was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed, when he doubted himself, when he questioned if he could truly help. But there were also moments of quiet understanding, moments when he felt a spark, a connection that made everything feel worth it. In the quiet of the royal chambers, with nothing but the sound of the wind outside and the soft hum of energy fields, around them they would talk for hours, sometimes about the ancient rituals, other times about their lives, their hopes, and their fears. It was in these moments that Ethan began to understand Ariax in a way that went beyond words. He could see the weight she carried as a ruler, the burden of responsibility she bore for the survival of her people. He could see her vulnerability, the fear she had of losing everything, of failing those who depended on her. And with each passing day, Ethan found himself growing more and more drawn to her, not just as a queen or as a ruler, but as a person. She was strong, yes, but she was also fragile. And the more he understood her, the more he realized that he cared about her, more than he had ever expected to care about anyone. One evening, as they sat together in the royal hall, Ariax turned to him with a look of quiet determination in her eyes. "We are ready to begin the final ritual," she said softly. "The one that will bind us together." Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. The final ritual, the moment that would determine their fates and the fate of her people. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. And as they prepared for the ritual, neither of them knew exactly what the future held. But they knew one thing: their journey was far from over. Together they would face whatever came next. The air in the royal hall was thick with anticipation. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him as he stood beside Ariax, his heart racing. This was the moment they had both been preparing for, the final ritual that would bind them together in a connection deeper than anything he had ever known. It was a connection that wasn't just about the physical. It was spiritual, emotional, and meant to secure the future of an entire species. Ariax stood before him, her eyes steady, her face calm, but Ethan could see the subtle tremor in her hands as she reached for the ceremonial robes laid out before her. Her strength was undeniable, but in this moment, he saw the vulnerability she had kept hidden. She wasn't just a queen in this moment. She was a woman, scared, uncertain, and desperate. She needed him to succeed. She needed him to be the one who could make the connection that had been lost in her people for centuries. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He wanted to be sure, to understand exactly what this meant before they went any further. The ritual, the bond, everything. It felt like the weight of the universe was on his shoulders. Ariax turned to face him, her eyes filled with resolve. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said softly. "This is the only way for my people to survive. For us to survive." Ethan swallowed hard. There were no words that could take away the pressure, no reassurance that could ease the knot in his stomach. But there was something about Ariax in that moment, her quiet determination, her trust in him, that made him feel as though he had no choice but to go through with it. He nodded slowly. "Then let's do this." Ariax stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest, her touch warm and steady, a contrast to the uncertainty swirling inside him. She was so close now, the air between them thick with the unspoken understanding that had built up over the past weeks. He could feel her heartbeat, feel the energy of her people pulsing through her. Everything about this moment felt sacred, and as much as he wanted to turn away, to say that he wasn't ready, something in him told him that this was what he was meant to do. The ritual began with a soft hum that echoed through the room. Ethan could feel the vibrations in his chest, the energy of it all flowing through him. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was deeper than that. It felt as though the very core of his being was being connected to something larger, something beyond his understanding. Ariax raised her arms, and the energy in the room intensified. The glow from the ancient symbols on the walls of the hall seemed to grow brighter, casting long shadows that danced along the floor. Ethan felt a pull toward her, an invisible force that made his heart beat faster. He couldn't explain it, but it was as though he was being drawn into something he had no control over. As she chanted the ancient words, the room seemed to blur around him. The noise faded, and all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat, slow and steady. Everything else seemed to fall away as he focused on the woman before him, the queen, the leader, the one who had asked him to do the impossible. Then, it happened. The bond between them was not immediate, but it was undeniable. It started as a whisper, soft, fleeting, barely there, but it grew louder, stronger, until it filled every part of him. He could hear her thoughts, feel her emotions, her fears and hopes intertwining with his own. The connection wasn't just physical. It was a merging of souls, a deep understanding that surpassed words. Ethan gasped, his hands shaking as the energy flooded through him. It was overwhelming, like a wave crashing over him, and yet at the same time it was incredibly peaceful. He could feel the weight of Ariax's duty on his shoulders, the responsibility she carried as a leader, as a queen, and as the last hope for her people. And he could feel her trust in him, her belief that he could be the one to save her. Ariax's eyes fluttered closed as the bond deepened, her body swaying slightly as if she were losing herself in the connection. Ethan reached out instinctively, his hands finding her arms, steadying her. There was a deep warmth in his chest now, a warmth that seemed to fill the entire room. It was like nothing he had ever felt before, a sensation of being truly connected, not just to another person, but to an entire world, an entire species. And with that connection came a sense of responsibility. He wasn't just there to help Ariax. He was there to help her people. The energy between them surged again, more powerful now, and for a moment Ethan thought he might be overwhelmed by it. But then, as quickly as it had come, the energy settled, leaving a stillness that was almost tangible. It was as though the bond between them had solidified, a permanent connection that neither of them could ever undo. Ethan looked down at Ariax, his breath coming in quick gasps. Her eyes met his, and in that instant he saw something different in them. It was as though she had been changed by the ritual, transformed in a way that he couldn't fully understand. But there was something in her gaze that told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just about saving her people anymore. This was about them, about the connection that had been forged between them. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Ariax nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. "It worked," she said softly. "I can feel it. I can feel you. And I know my people will survive." For a moment they stood there in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Ethan didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if this bond between them would continue to grow, or if it would change as time passed. But one thing was certain. He had just done something that had the potential to change everything. Ariax stepped back, her eyes still locked on his. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've given us a chance. You've given me a future." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions, relief, hope, and a deep sense of connection to her. "I'm just glad I could help," he said, though the words felt insufficient. There was so much more between them now, so much that couldn't be expressed in words. But that was okay. The connection they had was enough. As the days passed, Ethan and Ariax spent more time together, learning to navigate the bond that had been formed between them. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of confusion, moments when the connection between them became overwhelming. But there were also moments of peace, moments when they felt as though they were truly in sync with each other, as though they were two parts of a whole. The bond that had been formed between them wasn't just about saving her people. It was about something more, something deeper that neither of them fully understood yet. But as they worked together side by side, Ethan began to realize that they were not just saving her people. They were saving each other, and in that, there was a strength neither of them had known before. And so, as they prepared for what was to come, what they knew would be a long and difficult journey, Ethan and Ariax stood united. They had faced the impossible, and together, they had succeeded. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. For the first time, Ethan felt certain of one thing. He wasn't alone in this, not anymore. The days following the ritual were filled with a quiet intensity. The bond between Ethan and Ariax, now firmly established, seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. It was a connection neither of them fully understood, yet both could feel its power in their hearts. It was something beyond words, an energy that flowed between them, silent yet undeniable. It was a bond that connected their very souls, and neither of them could escape it, nor did they want to. Ethan found that the more time he spent with Ariax, the more he understood her, not just as a queen, but as a person. She was no longer the powerful ruler who had sent him here to save her people. She was someone with hopes, fears, and dreams just like him. He could sense the weight of her responsibility, the pressure she felt to protect her people. But he also saw the strength she held, not just in her title but in her heart. As the bond between them deepened, so did their understanding of one another. They no longer needed words to communicate. There were moments when they would simply glance at each other, and in that look, they would understand what the other was feeling. The connection was so strong that it sometimes became overwhelming, but it was also comforting. It was a reminder that they were no longer alone in this. They were in it together. One evening, as the two of them stood in the royal gardens watching the stars above, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The sky was clear, the stars shining brightly, and the cool breeze that swept across the garden seemed to carry with it the promise of something better. It felt like a new beginning, not just for Ariax's people, but for him as well. "I never thought I'd end up here," Ethan said quietly, his voice carrying across the stillness of the night. "I never imagined that I'd be a part of something like this, helping you, helping your people." Ariax stood beside him, her gaze focused on the stars above. She didn't say anything at first, but he could feel her presence next to him, the energy between them crackling softly in the air. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but there was a depth to it that made it seem as though she was speaking from her very soul. "You didn't have to help," she said softly. "You could have walked away at any time, but you chose to stay." You chose to be here. Ethan turned to look at her, meeting her gaze. I didn't choose this because I had to. I chose this because I believe in it. In you. Ariax's eyes softened. The vulnerability that she had kept hidden, now on full display. You've given me more than I ever expected, she said quietly. When I first asked for your help, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if you would understand, if you would even be willing to try, but you did. And now I feel like there's hope. Hope. The word lingered in the air between them, and for the first time since they had met, Ethan realized just how much it had come to mean. Hope was something that Ariax had almost lost, but now she was beginning to believe that there was a chance for her people, for them, to survive. And that hope was something he could never have imagined would become so important to him. I'm not sure what will happen next, Ethan said, his voice thoughtful. But I do know one thing. I'll stay with you. I'll fight for your people. I won't let you face this alone. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Ariax's lips. Thank you, Ethan, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. You've done more than you'll ever know. In the days that followed, the two of them worked tirelessly together to build the future of her people. They spent long hours studying the ancient texts, deciphering forgotten rituals and finding ways to strengthen the bond between their species. But it wasn't all about rituals and ceremonies. It was also about the personal connection they were building, not just for the survival of her people, but for each other. There were moments of laughter, moments of joy, and even moments of silence. They shared stories from their respective worlds, finding similarities and differences in their experiences. Ethan learned more about Ariax's past, about the loss of her family, about the way her people had once flourished, and how the connection between mates had been lost over time. He learned about the burden she had carried as a ruler, the weight of making decisions that would impact the lives of millions. But it was also in these quiet moments that Ethan learned something else. That they had become more than just a queen and a human diplomat. They had become something deeper. They had become partners. There was a mutual respect, a bond of trust, and a shared understanding that went beyond the need to save her people. It was a bond of two souls who had found something in each other that neither had expected. Yet despite the growing connection between them, the challenges they faced were far from over. The rival factions who had once threatened Ariax's reign were still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They saw her weakness, and they saw Ethan as a foreign element in her world, something they could exploit. There was no peace for Ariax's people, not yet. The struggle for survival was ongoing, and it was only a matter of time before the next battle would come. One afternoon, as they prepared for yet another meeting with the council, Ariax looked at Ethan, her expression serious. There's something you need to understand, she said. This bond between us, it's not just about survival, it's about leadership. It's about uniting my people under a common cause. I need you to be by my side, not just as a diplomat, but as something more. I need you to be a part of this fully. I need you to stand with me. Ethan nodded slowly. He had known that this day would come, that he would have to make a choice. But hearing it from Ariax, hearing her ask for his commitment, made him realize just how much he had already become a part of her world. I'm with you, Ariax, he said firmly. I always have been. And with that, their roles shifted. Ethan was no longer just an outsider, someone brought in to help. He was now an integral part of her leadership, a partner in the battle for her people's survival. He had been chosen, not just by Ariax, but by the bond they shared. And with that choice came a new set of responsibilities, ones that he was now ready to face. The council meeting was tense, as it always was. Ariax stood before her people, her strength evident as she addressed the gathered leaders. Ethan stood by her side, his presence a reminder of the trust and unity that had been forged between them. He could feel the eyes of the council on him, some filled with suspicion, others with curiosity. But it didn't matter. He knew that he had a place here now, and that place was with Ariax. As the meeting continued, the discussions became heated. There were factions within her people who still didn't trust Ethan, who believed that relying on a human was a mistake. But Ariax stood firm, her voice unwavering as she defended their alliance. She spoke of the bond they had forged, the hope that they had rekindled, and the future they could build together. Ethan listened, amazed by her strength and conviction. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a leader. And with her by his side, he knew they could overcome whatever came their way. The road ahead would not be easy, but together they would face it. As the meeting came to a close, the council reluctantly agreed to support their plan, but it was clear that the journey ahead would be long and difficult. There would be more battles, more challenges, and more moments when the future seemed uncertain. But as Ethan looked at Ariax, he knew one thing for sure. They would face it together. They were no longer just two individuals thrown together by circumstance. They were partners bound by a connection stronger than anything they had ever known. And in that bond there was hope. There was always hope.